Okay, so it's set up to record now.
Okay.
And this is Kara. And Kara's going to be Kara Wasilauski. Did I say it?
Yeah.
Okay, and she's going to be interviewing Betty Wyckoff. So go ahead.
Okay. So where were you born and when did you first live in Hopkinton?
I was born in Concord, Mass., but I was, as a baby, brought to Hopkinton on Claflin Avenue.
Oh, okay. And what way is that street, Claflin Avenue, different now than it was when you were living there?
Actually, that particular street hasn't changed an awful lot. It's pretty much been the same. When I was a child, though, that area was mostly apple orchard, all on one side. They had the row houses on one side, but on the across from it had been an apple orchard. And so my dad bought a lot of land and built his own house with my mother's help. And it was all open in that area for farming so that you could see Mount Wachusett from the house. And we raised strawberries commercially, and I used to peddle them from door to door in a strawberry basket. You could carry 8 quarts in a strawberry basket, and even at the age of 10, I'd go door to door selling them for 50 cents a quart, and they were piled sky high as we could get them on.
What are some of your earliest memories regarding Hopkinton?
My earliest memories were, of course, in those days, everybody was allowed to go into everybody else's house. And so I knew every person on the street, and it was a mixed group of people. We had retired people, handicapped people, people who were extremely poor, or even dysfunctional families. I knew everybody's house upstairs and downstairs, and I knew all about them. And it was all right to visit them. My mother never worried about us visiting all these people. And I was intrigued by anybody who was lonely. There'd be some widows that would watch by their window when I went by coming home from school, and so they'd open their window to talk to me because they were in a wheelchair. There were a couple of people like that were in wheelchairs, so I'd just come and visit them and spend a little time with them on my way home from school, not realizing how important it was to them. I did it because I wanted to. I didn't realize I was maybe helping them too.
Yeah. What kind of games and activities would you do with the people in your neighborhood or maybe your friends?
The neighborhood was a dead end, and so all the kids played together, and there were no cars in our way, really. If anybody came down the street, they crawled down because they knew we used the street as our playground. Mm-hmm. And at night, we played kick the can, and it was always older kids playing even with the younger kids. There was none of this thing about, oh, you can't play because you're too little, or no, the older kids shouldn't be playing because they're too rough or something. We all played together with these games, and the game of kick the can, I'm sure a lot of people know. One person is it, and they count to 10 and they kick the can, and that means they're going to come and try to find you. And if they see you, they try to get back to the home base before you do to not be caught. It's just a fun hide-and-seek kind of fancy hide-and-seek game, but we played it all the time.
What about activities that took place in the town, like dances at Girl Scouts, church groups?
Yes. There was a teen canteen, and it was associated with the Hopkinton Congregational Church, but anybody was invited. And I think it was just about once a week. It was grades 7 through 12. You could dance with anybody, and everybody behaved, and there was never any alcohol or drugs or anything. Everybody was very polite, and everybody was dressed up, and they served refreshments, and it was a wonderful way to socialize. Even I didn't think there was any problem with the 7th grader talking to an older kid, because we were used to talking to older kids in the neighborhood. It didn't make that much difference. There wasn't any maturity problems or any of that kind of thing that we talk about today. And of course, church, almost everybody I knew went to church. And even as a child, I was supposed to wear white gloves. I had to wear white gloves to church. And you had to be spotless and ironed. Mm. And everybody was, no matter how poor or rich they were, they looked their best when they were out in public. And we used to pick up other kids on our way to school. And there was one family where the mother was always in a dither and not prepared for them to leave, and she'd say at the last minute, oh, I forgot to comb your hair, and she wouldn't be able to find a comb. So invariably, many times, she would comb their hair with a fork.
What about the schools? Did you go to school here?
Yes, I went to school here at the center school. Grades 1 through 6 were in the same building. And you had an hour for lunch, and you were allowed to go home for lunch. So I lived a mile away, so I would run home to have lunch with my mother, and I would run back to school, and I usually would run home after school, and many times I'd run to school. So I was running about 20 miles a week. And my mother kept bringing me to the doctor to see why I wasn't gaining any weight. And it never occurred to either of us that maybe it was the running. Was why I couldn't gain any weight.
Yeah.
I can remember getting onto the second hill. I'd always get a stitch in my side, just in the same place every time. And I'd have to stop and put my hand on it and walk a few minutes, and then I could run again. So.
How many buildings were, like, for the schools? Like, how many buildings were there?
There was just the elementary school, and they had just, when I was taking violin in the 3rd grade, they had just completed the high school. And my violin teacher used to take me out of school and bring me up to the high school to play with the high school orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And we did that on a regular basis. I mean, teachers had that kind of time. Can you imagine, spending the time just to pick up one student to bring them up to play in an orchestra? And every teacher had their own room, and every teacher had to play the piano because it was required for them to get their degree. And so almost every classroom, if it was a rainy day, the teacher would sit down at the piano and play the few songs they knew. Mm-hmm. So you'd play the same ones. I remember in 5th grade we did "O Far, Far to Zanzibar," and we sang it over and over, but we didn't care. Kids don't mind repeat.
Yeah.
And we loved it, and it was natural for us to sing. And, you could either be quiet at your desk or you could come around and hang around the piano and sing, and I thought that was wonderful. So.
How big were your classes?
They were pretty big, 28 to 30 kids in a class, but there were no discipline problems. In the whole 6 years I was there, I never saw a discipline problem. Some kids had some handicaps. There may have been some kids that might have acted up, but they never got away with it very long. The teachers were the rule, and the superintendent or the principal would take right over very quickly too. Yeah. And the principal, when I was in elementary school, was Robert Nealon, and he would greet every kid as we came into the school, and he seemed to know everybody by name. All 6 grades, and that impressed me. And it was every teacher kept their same room. We didn't start switching rooms at all until 6th grade. So the teacher had the same room for like 20 or 30 years, and they all had their own plants, and the rooms were huge, as you see in the center school, big windows that actually worked in those days. It was much more like home. It was not institutionalized at all at that point.
What kind of classes would you take? Were there any classes that everyone loved, or some classes that not everyone loved?
No, I thought school was extremely easy. We had no homework, very little homework. I think I had to read 1 book in the 4th grade. Really didn't get any homework of any amount until 6th grade, and then it was just 1 or 2 little things. It was something you could probably almost finish in school. Mm-hmm. So it was very easy, because once you were out of school for the day, you were done, and you had time to play until dark or until supper time. Yeah. Most people had a rule: you had to be home by supper time. You could do anything you want as long as you're home by supper time.
Did you have any friends that lived in Woodville?
Yeah, because I had a horse. I was only 10, but I had a very, very good horse. And there were 2 older girls that wanted to go riding with me too. Mm-hmm. And they knew all the trails and they knew where to go. I would just kind of follow. But one of the girls came all the way up from Woodville, and I remember she had a buckskin. And the other girl was Jeannie Arms, who had a beautiful black and white pinto. And we would ride our horses all the way to Framingham and back, and stop and give kids rides if they wanted. We would stop in the driveways and give people rides, because we knew how excited they were to see the horses. And we'd chase trains down by Framingham, and one time we rode up behind WKOX to wave through the window, and we'd go all day with no money, no water, and no lunch. Never thought about it. We just rode, you know. So we never had saddlebags or sun protector or bug spray or anything like that. I remember one time we were galloping down by Keefe Tech. It wasn't there then, but around that area, and I got whacked in the head by a branch.
Oh.
But I was fine. You know, I wasn't bleeding, so we kept on our way.
Do you remember 495 being built?
Not so much, because by then I was quite a bit older, and I do know that the first day it opened, they had like only 10 cars use it. It was one of those things people thought it was a highway to nowhere.
Yeah.
It took a long time for people to realize the convenience of that road. So I have a lot of friends that one of the biggest things it did was interrupt our bumpy ride to the lake. We used to get onto Lumber Street, and it was very hilly, and that was the way you could go right from Lumber Street right to Downey Street, right to the lake. And my sister had an old car, and she'd make believe we were in a roller coaster. And so that when 495 came about, that ruined our little romp.
What was the downtown area like?
You look like just stick a guitar in your hand.
Very friendly. There used to be, you know, a lot of inexpensive stores. For 10 cents, you could go up to Hughes's drugstore and get, you know, a funny book for 10 cents. So everybody was into funny books, you know. There was a cobbler down near, not too far from Kate's, but across from the main road. And anytime we had to do a concert or something, my mother would send me down to the cobbler to have my shoes resoled. Because one of the things in those days, everybody had real leather shoes, and if they got wet, sometimes they would come apart. And so, you know, no one was allowed to have any holes in their shoes when you did a concert. So we'd go down, for 50 cents, he'd put new soles on your shoes. And he had a red dog that sat on the sidewalk right there. And there was a bell shop there where you could actually buy women's clothes, which is very, very handy. Mm-hmm. And Kate's drugstore had a wonderful soda fountain, so you could get a huge banana split for 50 cents.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great.
When you think back on like your childhood in Hopkinton, are there any like events or anything that really stand out in your mind?
Well, the Horribles Parade was always fun because there were no rules and the guys went overboard. They were, you know, there was no such thing as political correctness in those days. Anybody could insult anybody, and we all took it just like they do when they do the raising of somebody on Irish Day or whatever. And so it was always very funny, and it was always very long, and almost everybody stayed home to watch it because people didn't go away very much. People didn't have cars to go on vacations. They didn't have second homes. They hardly could afford the home they were in, you know. You're saying events? What was the question? Was it events?
Yeah, events or...
Well, on Halloween, of course, you could go out all by yourself. I didn't have to have parents go with me, right? And I can remember being so disappointed when a person would give me an apple, you know?
Yeah.
But at the end of my jaunt, the town hall always put on a wonderful show for the kids. And I would see some movies, or they'd have a little candy, and so that's where we'd all end up until like 9 o'clock, and then we'd all go home. And it was, I one time saw someone waxing a car, and I asked my mom, I said, well, that looks like fun. I said, could I have some wax to do that? My mother says, oh no, you don't wax cars.
What aspects of Hopkinton do you think have changed the most from then to now?
Well, the thing that's happened to Hopkinton has happened to all the small towns. There's more money and more choices. Everybody has so many choices and so many options that they almost go around in circles. I think when I was a child, they didn't have those options, and so they settled with what they had. And I think they were happy because they weren't always pining away for more, better, bigger, more expensive, the newest. It really wasn't like that. It was more about playing Pachisi and Monopoly and Scrabble, and people came in and played cards. Television hadn't taken over. And so there was more socializing in the community, and everybody knew everybody. So if anybody was doing anything wrong, or if there was a stranger in town or something, everybody knew.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you use your imagination. Children were allowed to, we all made huts. Everybody had huts. We make them out of anything we could find. And we all made those go-karts, because everybody had leftover baby buggy wheels. Because the buggies they used to have for the babies were huge. And when they were all done with them, and when we were all done with them, after we put our dogs in them and everything else, we took the wheels off and used the axles and made our own soap boxes. And we'd go up and down the streets with them. You know, they never were terribly greatly constructed, but we did it ourselves. We had hammers and nails. Everybody had hammers and nails. Everybody had a workshop or an extra room in the back of their house, because that used to be where the people did the cobbling of extra shoes way back, and those rooms were built for that. And now they were just for storage and little shops or vice grip things. And so we'd go into their parents' back room and construct whatever we wanted to.
Now, was there any technology such as TVs?
Television was just coming in, and I think that's why I absolutely drove my mother and father crazy for having a horse, because that was when Roy Rogers and Dale Evans started, and there was Annie Oakley and the Cisco Kid and the Lone Ranger, and there was just a big time in the westerns into horses, and so we all played cowboys and Indians. That was the biggest thing as children, playing cowboy. Everybody had cap guns with real caps. You know, they were, I don't know if you've seen them, but you know, they have a little bit of dynamite or something in them, so they really do smoke and you know, make a lot of noise. And so there was very few stations on, so you'd sit in front of it. Like, I remember waiting for Howdy Doody to come on with Buffalo Bill, and all it would be a number 5, and a big round circle with a number 5 and a kind of a hum. Mm-hmm. And you'd sit there waiting for the show to start. There was nothing before it, nothing after it.
Now, you described a really active childhood. Would you say that TV hindered that at all?
Yeah. Not when I was a child, because there was so little of it. And I know there were 5 children in my family, and we had to be in bed by 7:30. No matter summer and winter, and it used to drive me crazy in the summertime, because all the kids in the neighborhood would be still outside playing, and I had to be in my room. A couple of times I think I was able to go out the window, down the garage roof, and down the tree and out.
Wow. You described some of the stores downtown. How has the downtown area and the stores there, how has that changed?
Well, you know, I'd have to say the area that was downtown is still basically considered the downtown area. It hasn't really gotten longer or anything. Mm-hmm. It was pretty much from the grain store. There used to be actually a grain store where Hopkinton lumber is. It was called Mr. Wright had a grain store, because people had cows and horses. There were over 200 horses in Hopkinton when I was a kid. Anyway, it pretty much started there, and it would go all the way through until the pizza place now, in the church, in the common. And it kind of peters off after that. So the stores might have been more spaced out, and they were smaller in scale. You know, Colella's was much smaller. There was a Woods' store, very small. And there was Osborne's, where you could buy glass animals for 10 cents. And, you know, nothing was fancied up. Nothing was fancy. There were no lights in town. And I don't even remember having any stop signs. I don't even think there was a stop sign at Grove Street, where Cedar Street comes. And that came later. And we used to roller skate all the way down. We didn't know how to use brakes on the roller skates, and we just kept going. Mm-hmm. So cars were going slow enough to be able to stop if we went right by them or something. There weren't that many cars to worry about.
How do you remember any big national events, maybe like presidential inaugurations, anything on a larger scale, and how Hopkinton sort of reacted?
Well, World War II had just ended when I was born. Mm-hmm. So I did see a lot of parents who had handicaps from the war. I knew one guy who had a hook for a hand, and I was amazed at that. You know, I'd ask a lot of questions about how that happened. You did see some of those people come home. I had a lot of uncles and stuff that came home from the Battle of the Bulge. So there was definitely World War II impact. And of course, the biggest impact is that we are the baby boom.
Yeah.
And so I have 7 girl cousins, all born the same year. We were all born in 1946. And we've stayed close all these years. And we're all 5'2".
I think that's about it. You described some of the changes you saw in Hopkinton. Oh, did you want to tell us about horseback riding on Route 9?
I can. We would go and, like I say, first we'd go through the trails of Hopkinton. We knew all the trails in Hopkinton. There were a lot of them off of Ash Street, and you could work your way down quite a way without going onto a road. But then when we got to the road, we'd go maybe to the Ashland State Park there and let our horses get a little bath. So, you know, you could take your horses right into the water. Nobody cared.
Yeah.
And they know how to swim. You just put your feet up so you don't get your feet wet, you know. And then we would continue on, and like I said, we would go over bridges, and we'd stop anywhere little kids flagged us down, because I did the same thing. I used to flag this girl down that had the big Pinto, and she'd always give me a ride or something. And so I never forgot what it was like to pine away to have a horse, and how wonderful it was to finally have one. So, you know, it's like you'd never forget. And so we get a kick out of it, you know. And we didn't get as, you know, the closest we got to Route 9 was probably the WKOX. But still, only because it was too far away, not because we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
That's why you see on 495 a big cross that says no horses. And people say, why does it say no horses? We haven't seen any horses on these highways for years. But when 495 and these places went up, it was still rural enough that we were considering reusing them.
Mm.
They had nice, you know, breakdown lanes and nice grass on the sides. Why not?
Yeah.
So they finally had to ban horses from the highway. And I'm sure we weren't the only ones that thought to do that. And that's why it's still up.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Well, thank you.